Imagine this scene. It's night. It's dark. You are standing inside your own home, and your back is literally pressed against the wood of your front door. And on the other side of that door, there is a mob, not just a crowd, a chaotic, violent, lust-driven mob from your own city.
Right.
They're pounding on the door, and they're demanding you hand over your guests you've just met, so they can assault them.
It is the definition of a nightmare scenario. I mean, just pure helplessness. You can hear the shouting, the threats, the adrenaline must be just spiking. It's a moment of terror.
Right. And you know exactly what they intend to do.
Yeah.
It's not a mystery. And in that specific moment, the man at the door, the prophet Lut, utters a sentence, a cry of frustration that has sparked centuries of theological debate.
He says, "If only I had against you some power or could take refuge in a strong support."
Basically, I wish I had some muscle right now.
I wish I had backup. Yeah.
And that specific sentence is the launch pad for our deep dive today. Because, on the surface, to you and me, that sounds like a very human wish.
Rah.
Who wouldn't want backup?
Of course. If I'm facing a mob, I want the riot squad.
Exactly. But in the high-stakes realm of theology, those words open the door to a massive controversy. Did a prophet of God panic? Did he crack under pressure? And most importantly, did he forget that his ultimate backup was supposed to be God?
Yeah, and that's a heavy accusation. We are talking about that concept of tawakkul, which is, total reliance on the divine.
Right.
So if a prophet wishes for a human army, does that mean he's stopped trusting in the divine plan? Does looking for a sword mean you've forgotten the shield of God?
So today we are unpacking a fascinating source text. It's titled Descending the Prophets, Lessons from Abraham and Lot. And this isn't just a story retelling, it is essentially a legal defense brief.
That's a great way to put it.
It takes these ancient accusations against the character of the prophets, and it just dismantles them piece by piece using grammar, sociology, and textual criticism.
It's a really rigorous defense, and the source contrasts the Islamic narratives, which emphasize prophetic infallibility and protection, with the biblical accounts you find in Genesis.
And the goal?
The goal is to vindicate Lot using what the text calls 11 faces, or 11 distinct arguments, that range from the linguistic structure of ancient Arabic all the way to the sociological realities of the ancient Levant.
So our mission today is to walk through that defense. We want to understand how the source reconciles that very human moment of vulnerability at the door with the theological requirement of unwavering trust.
It's a balancing act, really, between humanity and divinity.
And before we even get to the mob at Lot's door, the source actually sets the stage with his uncle, Abraham.
Right. It starts with Abraham to build a contextual foundation. The source argues that before you can judge Lot's character, you have to look at the reliability of the texts that are, judging him. And it starts with a bit of a detective story about names.
This part was surprising to me. The source does a bit of textual criticism on the Bible, specifically comparing verses from Genesis and Exodus regarding the name of God. Could you walk us through this contradiction? Because it seems technical, but the implications are huge.
Oh, they are. It is a classic example of what scholars would call textual criticism. The source highlights a discrepancy about when the specific name of God, Yahweh, was actually known to the patriarchs.
Okay.
So if you look at Genesis 22, verse 14, the text suggests that Abraham knew God by the name Yahweh. This is the famous scene of the binding of his son Isaac, or Ishmael, depending on the tradition.
Right, on the mountain.
On the mountain. And Abraham names the place Jehovah-Jireh, or Yahweh-Jireh, which means the Lord will provide.
Okay, so in the timeline of Genesis, Abraham is using the name Yahweh. He knows it, he speaks it, he names locations after it. Pretty straightforward.
It seems so. But then the source flips over to Exodus chapter 6, verse 3. And in that verse, God is speaking to Moses, we're talking generations later, and explicitly says, "I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob as God Almighty, but by my name Yahweh, I was not known to them."
Wait, that seems like a direct conflict.
It is.
Genesis has him saying the name. Exodus says he never knew the name. That's a continuity error, plain and simple.
Exactly. And the source uses this to argue that there is a contradiction in the transmission of the narrative. It questions the chronological reliability of the text.
So the argument is, what? If the text can't get this basic fact right.
The argument is, if the text can't agree on whether its central prophet even knew the primary name of God, how can we fully trust its depiction of their supposed character flaws? If the timeline of the name is confused, maybe the timeline of their moral choices is confused too.
It's establishing a baseline of skepticism toward the text that accuses them. It's like saying, before we accept the charges against these men, let's look at the paperwork.
A very good analogy.
And speaking of character flaws, the source also brings up the sister narrative regarding Abraham. This is the story in Genesis 12 where Abraham and Sarah are entering Egypt.
Right. And Abraham tells Sarah to say she's his sister, not his wife, so the Egyptians won't kill him to take her.
Now, to a modern ear, or even a classical one, that sounds like a lie. A self-serving lie to save his own skin while putting his wife in what seems like a very dangerous position.
It does sound that way. But the source text we're looking at treats this very, very differently. It doesn't call it a lie.
What does it call it?
It doesn't. In the source text, this isn't presented as a lie, but rather as equivocation. The Arabic term used is marid, and it's a very specific linguistic concept. It refers to the use of language that is technically true.
Technically true. How?
Well, in this case, Sarah is his sister in faith, for example. So the statement isn't a direct falsehood, but it's intentionally misleading to the listener to prevent a greater evil.
So it's about intent then, a hierarchy of harms.
It's entirely about intent and a hierarchy of harms. The greater evil here is murder. If he says wife, he dies, and she is taken anyway.
Right.
If he says sister, he lives. And he creates space to negotiate or delay, or perhaps rely on the protection that brothers were afforded in that culture. The source argues that prophets possess a high level of wisdom. They don't lie, but they might use language strategically to navigate impossible situations.
So the source includes this to set a precedent for us, the readers.
Yes. It sets the stage for how we should interpret prophetic speech. Just because a prophet says something that sounds one way to us, like, she is my sister, or, as we'll see, I wish I had power, doesn't mean our surface interpretation is the correct one.
We have to look below the surface.
We have to look at the context, and we have to look at the intent, and that concept is absolutely crucial when we get back to Lot.
Okay, let's go back to Lot. We're back at the door, the mob is there, the pressure is immense, and Lot says, quote, from Surah Hud, verse 80, "If only I had against you some power or could take refuge in a strong support."
And this is the core of the deep dive. The accusation discussed in the source is that Lot, in this moment, relied on asbab, which means worldly means or causes, rather than the causer of causes, God himself.
The critics argue he wanted a tribe or a clan to fight for him.
And in doing so, his heart turned away from divine reliance. That's the charge.
It sounds so harsh, doesn't it? To judge a man who is facing a mob for wanting a police force feels a little bit like victim blaming.
It does, but you have to understand, in this theological framework, prophets are held to a superhuman standard. They are the models of faith. And if the model cracks, the whole structure shakes.
The argument being that a prophet should be so immersed in the presence of God that the presence of a mob becomes, what, irrelevant?
Or at least secondary. The divine reality should always supersede the physical one for them. And to make matters more complicated for the defense, there's a saying, a hadith, of the Prophet Muhammad that's mentioned in the text.
Right. He says, "May Allah have mercy on Lot. He was taking refuge in a strong support."
And this is where interpretation becomes a battlefield. Critics look at that hadith and they say, see, even Prophet Muhammad is rebuking him.
They hear a tone of pity in that.
A pity for a failure, exactly. Like saying, poor Lot, he didn't realize he already had support. They see it as a confirmation of Lot's weakness, a subtle nod that he missed the mark.
But the source text we are looking at today says absolutely not. It argues that interpretation is completely backwards.
It rejects that interpretation entirely. The source presents 11 faces or arguments to prove that Lot never wavered in his faith. And the first line of defense is actually linguistic. It redefines what Lot even meant by power and support.
Let's unpack that. This is phase 1 and phase 10 in the text. I love a good grammatical plot twist, and this one really relies on a single conjunction.
It really does. So phase 1 deals with basic definitions. The source explains that when Lot asked for power, he meant helpers or supporters in a physical sense. You know, men who could hold a shield.
A posse.
A posse, yes. And when he asked for a strong support, he was referring to a tribe or clan, a powerful family.
Okay, so strictly speaking, he is literally wishing for a police force or a family network to step in. He wants boots on the ground.
Yes. But here is the twist, and this is phase 10. The source relies on the Kufan school of grammar. Now, Arabic grammar schools are famous for their detailed debates, and here it really pays off.
How so?
The source argues that the word lot uses ah, which usually translates to or, can, in this specific context, essentially mean nay or rather.
Wait, break that down for me. Usually the sentence is translated as, I wish I had power, or R, could take refuge in a strong support.
Right. And that sounds like two options. Option A, power. Option B, strong support. It sounds like he is looking for either of two worldly solutions.
But if awe means nay, or rather, the meaning shifts dramatically.
Exactly. The sentence structure becomes a pivot. It becomes, I wish I had human power. Nay, rather, I am taking refuge in a strong support.
Oh, wow. That completely flips the script. It changes the sentence from a cry of despair into a self-correction. It's a statement of affirmation.
Precisely.
It's like saying, I wish I had an army. Actually, strike that, I have God.
Precisely. It turns the sentence into a correction of his own thought process in real time. He acknowledges the lack of human help, then immediately pivots to affirm his reliance on the ultimate support, which is God. It shows a mind that is actively aligning itself with faith, not losing it.
So it makes the statement a declaration of tawakkul, not a lapse of it.
The very opposite of what the critics claim.
That is a fascinating linguistic pivot. It's amazing how much theology can hang on a single two-letter conjunction. But the source doesn't just rely on grammar. It goes into the psychology of the prophet, too. This brings us to the internal versus external dynamic.
This is phases 2 and 5. The source argues we have to distinguish between Lot's internal state, his heart, and his external speech. The argument is that his heart was fully and completely relying on God. There is no doubt there.
But his speech.
His speech was for the benefit of his guests.
Right, you have to put yourself in the shoes of the guest. You're standing there, you're strangers in a strange land, watching this violent mob gather.
You're terrified.
And if your host is just standing there smiling, all zen-like, saying God will provide, you might be freaking out. You might think he's delusional or that he doesn't care about your physical safety.
Exactly. Lot needs to show his guests that he is doing everything humanly possible to protect them. He is vocalizing his frustration to show them, look, I want to protect you. I wish I had a clan to fight these people off.
So it's an apology to his guests, not a complaint to God. He's demonstrating his commitment to the laws of hospitality. He wants them to know he is not complicit in what's about to happen.
And the source quotes Ibn Hazm here, who I know doesn't mince words. He gets pretty intense about this accusation.
He does. Ibn Hazm is a heavyweight scholar from the Zahiri school, known for being very literal and very fierce in his arguments.
And he argues that it is borderline blasphemy to assume a prophet, someone who has seen miracles, who speaks to angels, who is the recipient of revelation, would suddenly think he has no support from God.
He calls it an impossible thought for a prophet.
Yes. He says essentially, how can you accuse a man who receives revelation of forgetting the one who sends the revelation? It connects back to the consistency of character. If you believe Lot is a prophet, you must believe he has a level of spiritual perception that prevents that kind of amnesia.
It's like assuming a master surgeon would forget how to hold a scalpel in the middle of a complex surgery just because the lights flickered.
Yes.
It's just not consistent with who they are trained to be.
It's a category error. Prophets don't panic like we panic. Their panic is always tempered by their knowledge of the divine.
Now, there is another layer to this defense that I found really compelling because it feels so grounded and real. It's the sociological argument. We often think of prophets as these solitary, mystical figures. But the source makes a big deal about Lot's social status in Sodom.
Yes, this is phases 7 and 9. This is crucial context that we often miss reading the text thousands of years later. The source reminds us that Lot was a stranger. He was an immigrant.
He wasn't from Sodom.
No, he was from the Levant, the Sham area, related to Abraham. He migrated there. And this means he had no natural social safety net.
Right.
In ancient societies, and frankly, in many societies today, your protection comes from your tribe, your clan, your blood relatives.
Of course, if you get into a fight, your cousins show up.
Yeah.
If someone insults you, your uncle speaks for you. If you're threatened, the whole clan steps in. Lot didn't have cousins there.
He was completely alone socially. The source contrasts him with other prophets, like Prophet Shu'aib or Prophet Muhammad. When Prophet Muhammad was persecuted in Mecca, who stood in front of him?
The Banu Hashim clan.
The Banu Hashim. Even the uncles who didn't believe in his message protected him. Why? Because he was one of them.
Tribal loyalty trumped religious difference.
Exactly. So Lot is operating without that buffer. He is operating without any social capital. He is a man with a message, but without a platform of physical protection.
So when Lot wishes for strong support, the source argues he isn't asking for God. He already has God.
He's not.
He is wishing for that social structure. He is wishing for the means, the asbab, that would physically deter the mob.
And that distinction between seeking God and seeking means is really important for you, the listener, to grasp. The source is saying it's okay to want means, it is human, and it is permissible.
The source uses a really practical analogy here. It compares it to, well, effectively calling the police.
Right. I mean, if someone is breaking into your house and you call the police, are you lacking trust in God? Are you failing in tawakkul?
No.
Or if you get sick and take medicine, are you failing to trust God's healing?
No, I'm using the system that exists to stay safe or get well.
Precisely. That is what Lot was doing. He was wishing for the police, effectively. He was wishing for a clan that could stand in front of the door and say, back off. The source argues that seeking help from creation to stop evil does not contradict reliance on the Creator.
It's about using the tools available in the physical world.
And there is a hadith mention that ties this up beautifully. It says, no prophet was sent after Lot except among the wealth or protection of his people.
That is a profound statement. It implies that Lot's struggle was unique.
And perhaps so difficult that God decided, never again. Every subsequent prophet was given that social buffer, a clan or tribe, precisely because Lot suffered so much without one.
So Lot was the exception that proved the rule. His wish for support was actually a valid identification of a missing tool that every other prophet was granted after him.
Yes, it validates his desire. He wasn't asking for something wrong. He was asking for a basic tool of prophetic survival that he happened to lack. It reframes his complaint as a legitimate observation of his strategic disadvantage.
He was fighting with one hand tied behind his back, and he simply wished that hand was free.
A perfect summary.
So let's shift gears to the narrative itself. There is a plot point here that the source emphasizes, which almost makes the whole controversy silly if you think about it. It's dramatic irony at its finest.
Faces 4 and 7. You mean the guests themselves?
Yes. We, the readers, sitting here with the book open, we know who the guests are. We know they are the Archangel Gabriel and other angels in human form.
Right. We know they have the power to level the city with a single shout.
But the source stresses that at that moment, Lot did not know.
He didn't. He thought they were just distinctively handsome young men who were about to be assaulted. He saw their vulnerability, not their power. He saw soft skin, not armor.
I mean, if Lot knew that the commander of the heavenly host was sitting on his couch, he wouldn't be worried about a mob of villagers.
Not at all.
He would know the mob is doomed.
Exactly. If he knew, his reaction would have been completely different. He might have even pitied the mob for what was about to happen to them. So his panic, or his anxiety, was based on a lack of information, not a lack of faith. He was reacting to the reality he could see.
So the source argues that the Prophet Muhammad's comment, "May Allah have mercy on Lot," wasn't a rebuke at all.
No, it argues it was an expression of sympathy, or even wonder. It's like saying, bless his heart, he was so worried about protecting them, completely unaware that the ultimate army was already in his living room.
It highlights his dedication. He was willing to face the mob alone to protect people he thought were helpless.
It's a tragic irony, isn't it? He's begging for strong support, while the strongest support in the entire universe is sitting right behind him.
And that lack of knowledge emphasizes his humanity. The source argues that God doesn't punish us for not knowing the unseen. Lot is defending the laws of hospitality and protection of the weak, even when the odds are impossible.
Which makes him heroic, not weak.
It creates this beautiful image of prophetic integrity. He is standing there, willing to get hurt to protect these strangers, not realizing they are there to protect him.
It really is a cinematic moment, and it completely absolves him of the charge of faithlessness. He was doing his job as a host and a protector.
And we have to talk about the other side of the coin. The source text spends a significant amount of time contrasting this defense of Lot with the biblical narrative found in Genesis chapter 19. And this is where the deep dive gets a bit darker.
The source material is very explicit here. It presents the Islamic view as a defense of Lot's character, and it rejects the Genesis account as a fabrication and a slander. It really doesn't pull any punches.
Let's list the specific grievances the source has with the Genesis 19 story. It depicts Lot fleeing to a cave after the destruction of Sodom.
Right. So in the Genesis account, Lot and his 2 daughters escape the destruction. They end up in a cave, and the daughters are afraid that there are no men left on earth.
They think the whole world has been destroyed, not just Sodom and Gomorrah.
Which is a strange assumption, but okay, that's what the text says. So they conspire. They say, come, let us make a father drink wine, and we will lie with him, that we may preserve offspring from our father.
And then, well, the text says they do exactly that. They commit incest with him.
Yes. They get him drunk on 2 consecutive nights, and both daughters become pregnant by their father.
That is a horrific image, especially for a prophet who spent his life preaching against sexual immorality.
The source details how the biblical text claims that from this incestuous union, 2 sons were born, Moab and Ben-Ami.
And who do these sons become? Why does the source focus so much on the names?
Because historically, the Moabites and the Ammonites were the bitter enemies of the children of Israel. They were the neighboring nations that Israel fought with for centuries.
Oh, okay. I see where the source is going with this. It's not just a story. It's a political origin myth.
That's the argument. The source argues that this entire narrative in Genesis isn't history, it's political propaganda.
Wow.
By claiming that the enemies of Israel were born of incest and drunkenness, the text delegitimizes them. It casts aspersions on their lineage. It's like wartime propaganda. Our enemies are the product of sin.
So the source posits that Lot's character was assassinated in the text, essentially to insult the neighbors.
That is the argument being made in the source, yes. The source asks the question, does it make sense that a prophet whose entire mission was to fight against sexual immorality and indecency in Sodom would end his life involved in drunkenness and incest?
The source calls it impossible.
It rejects it as a contradiction of the very essence of prophethood. In the source's view, prophets are protected from major sins. To attribute such behavior to Lot is seen as a corruption of the text, a slander inserted later to serve a political agenda against the Moabites and Ammonites.
It really highlights the divergence in how these figures are viewed. In one tradition, they are deeply flawed humans capable of monstrous acts.
Right.
In the tradition this source represents, they are protected moral paragons.
And that brings us right back to the central mission of the text, defending the prophets. The source isn't just nitpicking details, it is fighting for a specific worldview where prophets are models of integrity. If you accept the Genesis narrative, Lot is a warning of moral failure.
But if you accept the source's defense,
then Lot is a hero of hospitality and resilience.
it's a massive difference. One is a tragedy of character, the other is a tragedy of circumstance.
That's very well put. And reconciling Lot's cry at the door depends entirely on which version of Lot you believe in. If you believe he's the man in the cave, then panic at the door makes sense. If you believe he is a protected prophet, then the panic must be recontextualized, as the source has done.
So let's synthesize all of this. We started with a man at a door, wishing for power.
And we've seen that the source redefines that wish. Through grammar, we learned power meant helpers and support meant a clan-permissible social tools. And via that particle, we saw it as a self-correction.
Through theology, we learned that his heart never wavered. Even if his speech was desperate for the sake of his guests, he was managing the room, not losing his faith.
And through sociology, we understood he was an immigrant without a tribe, asking for the safety net that every other prophet was granted after him. He was wishing for the standard tools of the trade.
And through the narrative context, we realized he was acting on limited information, unaware that angels were in his presence.
All of these faces combine to clear Lot of the charge of lacking tawakkul. The source argues he was a man of immense faith, navigating an impossible situation with the limited means available to him.
And contrasting that with the Genesis account, where he ends up in a cave, really hammers home why this source text is so defensive. It feels the need to rescue Lot's legacy.
It is about restoring dignity. The source is saying, this man stood against an entire city of corruption. He deserves better than to be remembered as a doubter or a sinner.
So what does this mean for us, the listeners? Why does a grammatical debate about the word "or" matter today? Why should we care about 11th century defenses of 2nd millennium BC figures?
Well, I think it matters because it reframes how we judge moments of desperation, our own and others. We often think that faith means having a stoic, emotionless reaction to disaster.
Right.
We think if we panic or if we wish we had more money or more friends to help us, we are somehow failing God. We think true faith means never breaking a sweat.
But this deep dive suggests that seeking help, seeking those means, isn't a failure.
Exactly. You can call the doctor, you can call the police, you can wish you had a better network, and still be fully reliant on God in your heart. Lot teaches us that human vulnerability and divine trust are not mutually exclusive. You can be terrified at the door and still be a believer.
That's a relief, honestly. Because we all have those moments at the door. We all have moments where the mob, whether it's debt or illness or a crisis at work, is banging on the wood, and we feel utterly alone.
We do. And we shouldn't judge ourselves too harshly for wishing for a strong support. It's a natural human instinct. The source tells us that even the best of us wished for it.
Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a thought that really stuck with me from the source. The text mentions that after Lot, God ensured every prophet had a clan to protect them.
The strong support, the social buffer.
Right. It makes you wonder. We often look for miracles, the angels showing up, the sea parting, the fire cooling down. But the source implies that God's standard way of operating is actually through social structure, through families, tribes, communities.
It suggests that the miracle we often ignore is simply having people who have your back. It frames community as a divine gift.
Exactly. So here's the provocative thought for you to mull over. How much of your own safety and success do you attribute to your own brilliance? And how much is actually just the strong support, the social network, the family, the passport, the stability that God placed around you, which you didn't even have to ask for?
That is a humbling question. Lot had to ask for it. Most of us were just born into it. We are standing on a foundation we didn't build.
Something to think about next time you feel like you're standing alone. That's it for this deep dive into the defense of Abraham and Lot. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.